we have to summarize this Israel-Iran war. So here we have Minpress News reporting that Iran's missile had destroyed 11,000 Israeli homes and damaged 30,000, published by Israel's National Emergency Authority. These statistics were the estimated cost to Israeli housing infrastructure is said to be 1.2 billion US dollars alone, and that is right now seen as a very early estimate. US President Donald Trump at the NATO summit. Here is what he said, sitting side by side with Mark Rutte, NATO's Secretary General.
Look, they've got a country and they've got oil and they're very smart people and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings.
The casualty numbers, there was over 600 plus. Some are saying upwards to 1,000 Iranians killed, mainly civilians, over 5,000 injured. Israel did sustain major damage. Many are saying the 28 killed as an undercount because Israel always undercounts everything, and over 3,000 wounded. Talk about the impact of this conflict, given what we are seeing is a temporary retreat on the part of the United States.
I'm not so sure that it's a retreat. I think this is more a matter of strategy, a strategy that the United States is employing to dismember a nation that has been long slated for regime change in the region. It had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. I mean, in a way, it does, because Iran's pursuit of nuclear technology serves as a limit to the impunity the United States enjoys over the entire region. So in a way, it could be, but it's not just nuclear technology that the U.S. is driving U.S. foreign policy. It really is regime change, and nuclear technology is an obstacle to it. This is why they would want to remove it. This is why they talked about the ballistic missiles during the negotiations. I had pointed out for years and years. I mean, I've spent years of my life warning about this coming conflict and how the U.S. would use negotiations as cover to launch an attack on Iran through Israel, to then itself wade into the conflict. And that is exactly what happened, verbatim from the 2009 Brookings Institution's Which Path to Persia paper. You just type Which Path to Persia PDF into your search engine of choice, and it will pop up and you can read it. It's public. It's all public information. Now, Danny, you're talking about the cost to Israel. For all intents and purposes, it's irrelevant because the United States will keep Israel propped up. For people who had previously believed Israel was the master and the U.S. was the puppet, I think this is definitive proof that it's exactly the other way around. The U.S. is using Israel and fighting a war through Israel, just as it's using Ukraine and fighting a war through Ukraine. In Ukraine's case, the U.S. is fighting Russia. In Israel's case, the U.S. is fighting Iran. This was always long planned. There was an entire chapter in the 2009 paper titled "Leave It to Bibi," and that is exactly what the U.S. has now just done. I would say the most significant cost, however, for the United States is in terms of air defense and maybe to a lesser degree, long-range precision-guided weapons. These are munitions that are made in relatively small numbers. They cannot produce them faster than they're being expended. The U.S. has faced an air defense shortage since its proxy war on Yemen being fought through Saudi Arabia. Before the special military operation began in 2022, there was an acute shortage of Patriot missiles. And now, because of the U.S. war on Russia through Ukraine, that has become even more critical. And now we just watched the U.S., Israel, other nations in the region using U.S. air defense systems expend. It had to be hundreds and hundreds of these interceptors that will take years and years to replace. And why is this important? It's important because the U.S. is not just simply focused on Iran in the Middle East. Again, another indicator that this is not about the U.S. serving Israeli interests. This is about removing Iran to further isolate, encircle, and contain Russia and China. That is what this is all about. It's what it's always been about. Every single policy paper published features this as a central pillar of U.S. foreign policy, their objectives. And so if you are low on these munitions in your proxy war against Russia and also Iran, and your ultimate goal is China, China's has the largest missile arsenal on planet Earth in all of human history. how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to be in a position of advantage in any sort of conflict with China, directly at least?
The air defense point is really a really good one, because a lot of people have been focusing on Iran's issue with air defense systems, which is a very real problem. But Iran is under sanctions, and Iran has to navigate a very difficult regional terrain, and has had to essentially build everything domestically. And of course, it's made some choices to do that as well. Some have criticized Iran for not getting closer to Russia, asking Russia for help in this area. But that ignores the fact that at the NATO summit, Brian, Donald Trump said, with regard to giving more aid to Ukraine, he said, oh, yeah, maybe we'll give them more Patriot systems, but we need those too. Why? Because they're thinking exactly as you said in these terms. And I would argue, Brian, that on the one hand, Iran was able to survive and show that it could hit Israel, that it could even hit people. Really denigrated their symbolic gesture toward Qatar, but I know you have an assessment that I tend to agree with, which is they show that they can do it, that they can do it. It wasn't about how much damage they could do, but that they can. And so now I believe that the United States saw that Israel was going to run out of these air defenses, and that's why it had to stop. And so on the one hand, yes, the Iranian people have a lot to celebrate because that is a victory, but it also shows that the United States, it has other priorities too that cannot simply be accomplished through an accelerated conflict with Iran. Your take?
Yeah, well, as we had been saying all along, Iran's primary objective was survival. And so if the government and the nation state of Iran exist, they survived, and that is a victory for Iran, because ultimately this is about toppling the Iranian government and creating a failed state where it now exists. So it is a victory. It is a victory for Iran. But this was a devastating blow delivered to them. We have to always keep that in mind. The U.S. strikes on Iran through Israel, and then its own strikes directly on Iran did real damage. They killed many high-ranking officials, military commanders, scientists. It demonstrated a serious lapse in Iranian security. I have no idea why military commanders and scientists working on critical programs for the Iranian nation state, why these people were living in civilian homes and not on a base, protected by a wide security perimeter. They were using anti-tank guided missiles to kill these people in their homes. They just fired the missile right through the wall of these concrete apartment buildings and just turned the entire apartment to a fireball and killed these people. That should never have been a possibility. That should never have happened. Before the show, we were talking about telecom in Iran. The fact that you see Iranians with sometimes Western mobile phones. Why? These are tracking devices. We know this all throughout the war on terror. The war on terror the U.S. Waged around the planet. That is how they were primarily finding and killing people, by just tracing their phones, because they have this global network of surveillance that allows them to do so. And this is why nations like Russia and China create their own independent telecom infrastructure. I was listening to a recent interview with KJ No, very impressive interview with Jamal Thomas, and he was talking about digital sovereignty, this necessity to treat information space as a national security domain. So these are all utter lapses. These are things that need to be taken care of for Iran to go forward into the future. This is not over. This is not over by a long stretch. We remember the United States going to war with Iraq in the 1990s, and after that mission was deemed a success, the U.S. periodically bombed Iraq, attacked them, pursued regime change within Iraq using terrorist groups, militants, ethnic minority groups, and that is exactly what what they have been doing and will continue to do in regards to Iran. So this is a constant war with these brief periods of just open hostilities. One other thing, there's just so much to talk about. One other really important thing to keep in mind is, up until now, there has been a sort of political limit for Israel and for the United States in terms of directly striking Iran, even though there were those exchanges last year. That limit has now been removed. So now the US and or Israel can strike Iran at any time for any reason. That limit has been removed. In the minds of Americans, this is now acceptable. And so this is what will be taking place in the future moving forward. So Iran has to accept that reality and they have to adjust to it. They have prevailed and endured for decades against U.S. pressure in the region, along their borders, within their borders, and they just have to continue. Their existence depends on it.
I want your opinion on this because now U.S. intelligence is saying, and they're through a controlled leak through CNN, Fox News has also corroborated this, despite Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and others trying to say, well, we destroyed them. Wait, no, maybe we set them back, but it's really, really bad what we did to Iran. But U.S. Intel is saying, actually, they weren't destroyed, the sites, and in that strike. And it's probably only a couple months at best that Iran will be delayed, that as long as they're not under open military hostilities, they will likely be able to rebuild this program. So, Brian, I'm wondering your impression on this, because on the one hand, it's a big blunder. On the other, it could be seen as a justification to use this excuse, as this pretext again and again. So that's why I'm thinking about both. It could very well be true. It's most likely true that they weren't able to get underneath to Fordo. Many experts have said this is probably the case. But also, this opens the door for future conflict and war.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should assume that the strikes were a failure, or that. I mean, until you have definitive proof otherwise, I would not just dismiss the one thing the U.S. really excels at is death and destruction. So I would not underestimate their ability to destroy these facilities. You just have to think about Iran and it looking at the rest of the world and the necessity to have facilities that are unknown to the United States, contingency plans, redundancy in their nuclear program specifically for this. It was obviously going to come. It was obvious for years and years and years. They had a decade, 2 decades to prepare for this. So hopefully that is a factor. Danny, before you mentioned the civilian government of Iran, and a lot of people are criticizing the civilian government of Iran for negotiating, talking, trying to, some people interpret it as being friendly to the West. These are emotional reactions by the general public and armchair commentators. Every nation needs to pursue diplomacy. They need to negotiate, especially if you're a victim. You are a targeted nation by U.S. aggression. You need to demonstrate to the entire world, to counter the U.S. propaganda claiming otherwise, that you do not want war, that this is a war that is being forced upon you. And that is what the civilian government of Iran did. That's what they achieved through their negotiations. They demonstrated without doubt in the minds of everybody, maybe too much so, that they had no desire for war whatsoever. And this was actually something mentioned in the 2009 Brookings Institution paper, the fear that the Iranians wouldn't be goaded into the war the U.S. wanted to provoke. And that is exactly what Iran did. They refused to be provoked and goaded into what would be perceived by the world as an act of aggression on their part. They made it abundantly clear that this was the U.S. and Israel attacking them and them responding. And the very fact that people are frustrated with the way they responded, you were talking about the strike on the U.S. airbase in Qatar. This is all calculated escalation on their parts to maintain in the minds of people around the world the reality that this is a war against them that they did not seek, and that is being imposed on them against their will. And we talk about taking away the political limits of striking Iran. And well, Iran has now removed the political limits of striking U.S. facilities in nations that are hosting them. So now it works both ways. And that is what they have achieved. Now, you were talking about, well, we talked about the nuclear program. We don't know what is left of it. Again, KJ No was talking recently about, and many other analysts actually have been talking about, which way does Iran go now? Do they go toward the Libyan model, which is what the US has actually called it. Just surrender your nuclear program, dismantle your ballistic missile program so that we can just finish dismembering your nation and create a failed state where it used to exist? Or do they go the way of North Korea, the North Korean model? And something that KJ No pointed out that many people might not realize is that North Korea has a significant conventional military deterrent. I remember when I was in the U.S. Marines, people talking about the artillery capacity of North Korea alone. Hundreds of thousands of rounds every hour for days and days. That was what they were capable of doing. And then their conventional missile and rocket arsenal was also a factor. And this is what kept the U.S. at bay for years and years. I'm looking because I remember back in 2009 covering the Brookings Institution paper regarding Iran. And there was another one by the Council of Foreign Relations talking about toppling the government of North Korea when the current leader's father passed away. And they saw this as a window of opportunity to enact regime change. And of course, we know that eventually they developed these nuclear weapons. They do these missile tests specifically to impress upon the US their capability of not just having a nuclear weapon, a functioning nuclear weapon, but a way to deliver it. And this is something that is going to take a long time for Iran to establish. They need to focus on many, many different aspects of deterrence to survive. It's not just have a nuclear weapon and test it in the desert. If you have no means of delivering it, then you're still going to be attacked. It'll probably escalate and accelerate the timeline. One last thing I want to mention is we were talking about how the U.S. They wanted a quick win. They wanted to destabilize and topple the Iranian government quickly and cheaply. They need to do it efficiently, because if they get mired in a long-term conflict, as you were saying, and as I have been saying, they expend these weapons they cannot replace. President Trump talking about we need the Patriots. Ultimately, they need them for their war with China. That is coming. That is absolutely coming. If they expend them all in a protracted conflict with Iran, then they have failed. So I've talked about division of labor. I think we're going to talk about how all these European countries have committed to 5% of their GDP going to military spending, as was laid out in Project 2025 years before President Trump even ran for president. That was always the plan. And then again, according to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth back in February, he told Europe, you're going to spend 5% of your GDP on defense. And we're going to hand this proxy war over to you, and you're going to keep it going while we pivot to China. And we're going to stop along the way on Iran. So these are all factors we have to keep in mind. It is all interconnected. People who myopically obsess over Israel and this conflict against Iran are missing the much bigger picture all of this fits into. And if you cannot see that big picture, you will not understand the decisions being made in regards to the conflict in the Middle East specifically.
I understand Gaza, what Israel has done with the U.S. is, of course, total support, if not facilitation, all across the region just in the last 2 years alone, a little under 2 years, is horrific. And a lot of people wanted Iran to go the distance because many saw what Iran was doing and said, well, maybe they do have enough to damage Israel to the point that it is no longer able to do these things, or it could demand Israel stop. That negates the fact that the United States, however, could very well, you said it, Brian, or the U.S. is a bit outstretched. The U.S. does not have the capabilities to fight everyone at the same time. It's having trouble with Russia. Hasn't even really got able to get started with China, at least kinetically. It is trying to build up to that point. And of course, it opened Pandora's box with Iran during these last, that so-called 12-day war. Now, if Iran escalates to the point where Israel is in danger, do we truly believe the United States is not going to drop everything, is going to sit back and let that happen? No, you are going to be at total war with the United States because Israel is incredibly valuable to them. So much so that even these so-called conflicts, you have reports that Donald Trump berated Benjamin Netanyahu about breaking the ceasefire in the early hours with Iran. But then you have Netanyahu saying, Trump saying that he's actually going to rescue Netanyahu from his own legal problems, that he should be pardoned. This is literally coming out as we speak, Brian. And this is the game. right? This is part of what people don't understand is Iran does not want to engage in an all-out war with the United States. It might be able to get some blows in. The United States may very well sink the global economy and do all kinds of, and have a hard time with Iran, but Iran does not want to face a total war. So in my estimation, this is why it was maneuvering the way it did and was largely successful. So to me, the criticisms don't take this into account.
Well, I would say that if the U.S. has a choice between continuing to pursue global primacy or saving Israel, they will let Israel be annihilated. It's just like Ukraine. They will use Ukraine as long as it's useful, and then when it's no longer useful, it becomes expendable. And this is the story for every single proxy the U.S. uses around the globe. Yes, Israel has been one of the more successful, more valuable proxies. It is a long-standing proxy, a U.S. proxy since its creation out of thin air in the Middle East, between the British Empire, the remnants of the British Empire, and the burgeoning American Empire. But at the end of the day, this is about global primacy, and proxies are meant to be used. That is why Israel, not the United States, was catching ballistic missiles noon, night, morning, every day throughout the duration of this conflict. I think Iran understands this is a long-term conflict. It needs to conserve its capabilities. A lot of people overestimate what nations like Iran, Russia, and China can actually do. So they always imagine they're capable of doing these things, and it's just a matter of political decision-making that they don't do these things. If they had the capability to completely neutralize Israel, they would have. People don't understand that Russia's been firing thousands and thousands of missiles into Ukraine for the last 3 years, and the country is still there because the U.S. is propping it up. And the U.S. will prop up Israel, and you can fire hundreds and hundreds of missiles at Israel, can lay waste to their cities, but they're just going to keep rebuilding it. They don't have any internal constraints because they are externally propped up by the United States, which again is another little hint that they're not the ones making the decisions. They are 100% dependent on the U.S. Were the U.S. to pull the plug on either Ukraine or Israel, they would disappear almost overnight. And so this is important for people to keep in mind. It doesn't matter how you emotionally feel or what you think is going on. It only actually matters what is really going on and why. That's the only thing that actually matters. And so going forward with self-delusion is only going to leave you confused and frustrated about the outcome of these events.
The moment that Israel is no longer useful, the United States would drop it. However, despite the lobby and all of this, at this point in time, in this moment in history, Israel is incredibly valuable because the U.S. is having a bit of trouble maintaining its influence in the region without it. Actually, without Israel at this point, probably wouldn't have much at all because the U.S. has already shown through Afghanistan, Iraq, on and on and onward, that every time it engages in conflict, it actually can't really stay. It can, occupy a piece of Syria, it can do bombing campaigns, but eventually it's not able to assert the kind of influence it wants without this occupation state sitting in the region with all of the US's arms and military support ready to achieve its own aims only with the permission of the United States. And that is what I believe we are going to continue to see for quite some time. I mean, you even have Donald Trump trying to save Netanyahu now. Many people would say, you just had Steve Bannon say, oh no, this is Israel's war. But actually, Donald Trump wants to save Netanyahu. And essentially here, Donald Trump rescued Israel because he sees it as valuable right now.